Welcome to Real Jam Radio. I am Daniel, we're your host, and so happy to have you with us for this episode. I was originally unsure if I was going to do one Thanksgiving week. I do really like it, but it's one of those times, as many of you know, that it can get away from you a little bit. But I found the perfect guest who was willing to do it, and that's Derek Bodner, longtime friend of the show, and one of my favorite people to talk to. And the Philadelphia 76ers are one of the things I wanted to talk about most of this time of year. They've been really encouraging this year, and Derek is a great person to talk with about that. So he is a senior writer for The Athletic Philadelphia, covering the Sixers, and he's doing some draft work as well for the Fieldhouse, which is also part of The Athletic. And we go through the Sixers, what's been notable this year, what we still need to see, Embiid, Simmons, Fultz, some of their role players, and it's a great conversation. This episode is brought to you by Harry's. You can get their awesome free trial set that includes a razor, their shave gel, which I love, at harrys.com/realgm. All you have to do is pay for shipping. And then mybookie.ag. You go to mybookie.ag, enter the RealGM promo code, and you get a 50% deposit bonus on that initial deposit. This episode is a little shorter than most RealGM episodes. Long for a lot of other podcasts. It's a little less than an hour, but I think you'll really enjoy it. I hope you do. Thanks so much for coming on.
It's my pleasure, Danny.
You and I have talked about the Sixers a lot on various podcasts and just talking about the Sixers. And I'm so excited that now it's not theoretical in the same way that it was. I mean, we're going to talk about the future of this, of course, as well. But we have so much more actual basketball instead of what they could be now, which I'm thrilled about.
Yeah, we spent so much time talking about, if Joel Embiid stays healthy. And to be clear, that is still very much an if. And if Ben Simmons can translate, and if these guys that you drafted with the expectation, or at least with the hope that they would become, real star-level players, there's some real evidence that that is the case. In Joel's case, I would say that he is there when he's on the court already. And in Ben's case, he's a lot closer to being there than you would have reasonably expected. And the fact that path now to seeing that is so clear, and there's so much less fog in the way of that, it's quite an exciting time for a team that has been, this fan base is unique in that they embraced the concept of hope for so long, and they embraced it so wholeheartedly that for it to be paying off, it's fun to see.
What's also been striking, and we'll go through the players individually, but what I think has been striking to me is not necessarily the idea of, Simmons delivering and all that. No, those are important, but more so the fact that I think we already have a clear vision for how Covington, Embiid, and Simmons as a trio can work, and that has been as effective as it can be this early is really impressive, and also inspires maybe more hope than even the positive impressions each one of those guys has generated individually.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at that trio: Ben Simmons 21, Joel Embiid 23, I think now, and Covington around 26. So they're your trio, not just for now, but for the foreseeable future. They're all locked into a couple more years. You've got 2 more years after this one for Ben, obviously 4 more years after this one for Covington, and 5 more years for Joel. So they're going to be here for a while, and you can already see schematically how that is going to work. That is your 3, 4, 5 of the future, and they're already effective. It's hard with sample size at this point, but you're getting the point where those 3 on the court, I think the Sixers are like a plus 16 or a plus 17 in net rating, and you are talking now about 250 odd minutes. So there is something behind that number. Those 3 are working very well together. Obviously, right now, Covington is on a little bit of an unsustainable stretch. I don't think anybody expects him to no matter how many open looks Ben Simmons gets him, I don't think anybody expects him to shoot this well for the entire season. But defensively, that identity is already there, and Joel makes that identity crystal clear. And offensively, you're seeing how conceptually it will work.
Yeah, and that's what's been striking to me is more on the defensive end, and that goes to credit to all 3 guys, because Embiid has been spectacular. That's not a surprise. We expected that. Covington fits in well as a man-to-man defender and a team defender, and then Ben Simmons has so much ability. And so we saw this with smart guys before, where we've seen it with players who are savvy basketball players, that maybe they're shaky defensively at certain points, but that it's a lot more likely that they're going to figure it out. And with Simmons, the energy being far above what it was at LSU, I mean, I still think he can get a lot better on that end, has made it so, okay, I'm not worried about him there anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's inconsistent, but it's inconsistent like any 21-year-old rookie is. Whereas at LSU, it just looked like flat-out indifference. And that progression from indifference to inconsistent is really important. And it's also one that's really hard to predict. And I shared many of those same concerns watching him at LSU. I mean, they put him in a lazy 2-3 zone. I always say I don't think he got down into a defensive stance once that year. And trying to predict which one of those guys will break those habits and become a guy that you can really count on the defensive side of the court to at least give effort, to utilize his tools. He's defending a multitude of positions right now, which you always knew he had it in him physically, but to see him actually utilize that and realize that, it's been really encouraging, because quite frankly, you don't need him to be a lockdown defensive player. You need him to be able to switch when he needs to. You need him to be able to force turnovers, and you need him to care. And as long as he does that, he's got one of the best rim protectors behind him. He's got a good team defender in Covington next to him. They will function well as a group defensively.
Right. I've used the phrase before of reciprocal versatility, which is that if you have players who are really good defenders, all you need from the other guys, from the kind of the second tier or third tier guys, is the ability to cover the gaps. And Simmons has already shown that ability at this point. I think he can get even a little bit better than that. He's been active in passing lanes, and maybe the biggest surprise for me defensively, because you always knew there was a possibility he was going to care, is that Brett Brown has put him on point guards at moments in time, and there have been some stretches where he struggled, but generally speaking, he's been better than I expected there, and that leads me to have more confidence, not only in terms of what a switching system can do, but also in terms of how you think about the rest of that roster, because if he can defend ones with any consistency, you can handle those other spots a little bit differently.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it a couple times now where he's, come out of halftime and he's been on Kyrie, and you kind of go like, whoa, this isn't normal. That's a 6'10" guy who's going to get you 10 rebounds out on the perimeter defending Kyrie. And he has done that reasonably well. I mean, one-on-one, I think he's actually been far better than I would have expected. It's kind of off-ball when Kyrie comes off some of those screens, those kind of actions that he's going to have to get used to, that he's probably never really defended frequently in his life. But yeah, I mean, the sheer versatility between those guys. I mean, Covington 6'8", 6'9", you'll see him on point guard sometimes. Ben Simmons 6'10", you can put him on a point guard and not get embarrassed. I mean, you're seeing it with Boston, how you can really utilize that kind of versatility, scheme around that, and you use that to their advantage. The Sixers should have that in future years.
So to have the numbers out there, we're recording this on Wednesday afternoon. Covington, Embiid, Simmons have played a total of 245 minutes together, 112.4 offensive rating, 95.7 defensive ratings. That's a net rating of plus 16.7. And remember, that 95 defensive rating, 95.7, that's against opposing starters for the most part, because that's when those guys play together.
Yeah, and I mean, it's been against a pretty tough schedule too. A road-heavy schedule, and even when they're home, they've been playing, Boston and Houston and Golden State. Like I think they just played their sixth game at home, and a lot of those are against really good competition. Some of them not. You've got Atlanta and Indiana and Utah in there as well, but they've played they've been tested so far. I think for the most part they've held up. The big concern for them is still going to be, and will be for the foreseeable future, holding up when Joel Embiid's not on the court. But quite frankly, that's happened so infrequently this year, at least compared to our expectations, that they could end up finishing with a top 10 defense this year, and it wouldn't shock me at all, even with their youth.
You've watched a lot more of him than I have, but I've been a little bit frustrated with Richaun Holmes, and I've been thinking about, the idea of what you want in a backup center for the Sixers is different than other teams, partially because Embiid's health is going to be a concern to a point. There's nothing he can do to a sway shot. That's just when a big guy's had foot issues, you want to have that. But I've been thinking more in the last couple of weeks about having a capable defensive center just so you can kind of keep your schemes close enough to the same. And you don't have to commit a ton of resources to it, but even the idea of just using something to make sure that you line that up, because having somebody in that role, whether Embiid is healthy or not, would give them a stability defensively that could really help them long term.
Yeah, I share your disappointment in Richaun. It's kind of been a disappointment for a couple of years running now, because you see the athleticism and you see the effort he gives, even defensively, and you say, okay, you should be able to make that into at least a good enough bench defender. And so far, that just hasn't been the case. He's out of position quite a bit. His reads defensively just don't seem like they're sharp enough. The NBA is an interesting game where you get a point guard who can just get you leaning in the wrong direction, and that can be a cut to the basket for a layup. And Richaun gets bit by that a lot. He goes for blocks that, quite frankly, he has no chance for. There's a lot of tools that he hasn't put together. And you look at him now and he's, 23 or 24 years old. You wonder how much that's going to click long term. He's an interesting spot because he has this year and one more year remaining on his contract. And then, you're going to have to commit some money to him. I'm not sure exactly what that's going to be. I think a lot of it probably depends on how much playing time he gets over the next year and a half. But you do start wondering, if you get, let's say, the Lakers pick, and the Lakers pick is top 5 protected, meaning the Sixers get it. Well, it's a weird protection. They get it if it lands number 1 or if it lands after number 5. So you start looking at who might be there, and maybe it ends up conveying at 6, 7, 8 in that kind of range. And the best player is a center. If you can get a real, I don't want to say defensive anchor, but a defensive upgrade at that position to put behind Joel, do you consider that? And that's something where it's an odd question to ask because you have Joel Embiid, you have still Jahlil Okafor. Some days I forget that, but you still do have him on the roster. You have Rashawn Holmes. You just got rid of Nerlens Noel. You never would have said, maybe we should use another lottery pick on a big man. That's just not the way you expect when talking about the Sixers, but it might end up being the case.
And this draft, especially in that area, we don't know exactly where things are going to fall, has a lot of guys that could be potential fits, like Robert Williams from Texas A&M, if he's in that area, Jaren Jackson Jr., who I watched at Michigan State, Wendell Carter. All those guys are probably better suited, actually, at least in the early days, to that kind of a Sixers role where they're playing in the small spot, and then if they end up deserving something bigger, you probably trade them because as long as Joel Embiid is healthy, you're not. I doubt those guys are going to jump him. Like, that's not there. But when you have as many pieces figured out as the Sixers do, and if the other options at other positions aren't great, if they don't love the guys that are available at 2 guard, and Trevon Duval, who is a talented athletic point guard, can't shoot, that could create some problems with some of their lineups. You could also say, hey, it's a high ceiling backup point guard, something like that, or even Colin Sexton if he's still around. There are a lot of fascinating possibilities there. And then even with the Sixers' own pick, which they still have the rights to, maybe that's a spot where you could theoretically get a center as well.
Yeah, again, that Sixers pick, I think before the season, everybody expected, 13, 14, best case scenario. Like, making the playoffs before the season wasn't impossible because you looked at the Eastern Conference and you knew that there was going to be some opportunity for a, mediocre team to make the playoffs. But now, as long as Joel Embiid's healthy and he's playing these kind of minutes, it would be very surprising to me if they didn't sneak in as a 6, 7, 8 seed. So that draft pick, you end up looking late teens, early 20s. And yeah, at that point, you could certainly start looking. I mean, the possibilities, Sixers are in a great spot because if Markelle Fultz comes back, you've got 4 starting positions locked up. Well, assuming Markelle Fultz looks like the prospect we saw at Washington, you have 4 long-term starters locked up. You're really just looking for that one more wing player, probably a 2 guard who can play off the ball well and defend his position. And then you're looking for depth, and it just opens up so many opportunities, along with, like I said, Rashawn's maybe less than stellar defensive play, where anything really could be in play with either of those 2 picks.
The biggest surprise for me with the Sixers team, speaking broadly, has not been that the line I'm calling the Simmons, Embiid, Covington SEC. That's I'm using it in my head. I went through all the other acronyms, and that was the one I liked the best. But
like it better than Feds.
There we go. But so that gets into what I wanted to talk about, which is Saric actually fitting with those guys has been shocking to me because, first of all, I've questioned his jump shot. I love the way he plays, but I just never thought he was going to, at least at this point in his career, have a reliable jump shot. We're still small sample size. We're still dealing with that. But defensively, that combination has worked well too. And so you talked about the idea of, you need one more guy. There's a shot. I'm still not sold on it yet. Those guys have only played, I'm looking it up, 144 minutes together. They've been great in those 144 minutes. But the possibility of Saric, Simmons, Covington, Embiid being 4 of your starting 5 is fascinating to me.
Yeah, and I mean, there are a couple things. First of all, I wonder if maybe just the, Redick, Covington, Simmons, and Embiid grouping is so strong that's why, like, Saric might not have he's
the Zaza Pachulia.
He's the Zaza Pachulia. Yeah. I will say, I think defensively, I always thought you'll maximize Ben Simmons most playing him at the 4. And theoretically, I still think that's the case. Obviously, I think his rebounding and transition pushing are one of his real elite skills. You want to maximize that. He's still grabbing over 9 rebounds a game. It hasn't affected him by putting him on the perimeter a little bit more defensively. So if that's the case, it opens things up with Saric, especially if he's going to shoot 35, 36, 37% from 3-point range. And that was one of the things with his game last year. Yeah, he made a strong push for Rookie of the Year towards the end of the season, but his jump shot really abandoned him. Well, he came out and he shot okay from three-point range. For a while, he was over 40%, fell back down. I think now he's in a 35% range. That's still an improvement. He's struggled a little bit in other aspects of the game, particularly shooting inside the arc. Like he's got such a serious athleticism disadvantage that I think it's hurt him a little bit more now when he's much more of a spot-up guy and attack closeouts guy, rather than somebody that you really put the ball in his hands and ask him to create a little bit more frequently. I do think he's still struggling to find his role a little bit, but if Ben Simmons can defend the perimeter, and I think right now it's pretty clear he can, and that's not going to really hurt his transition game all that much, and Saric is going to make that three-point shot, you give it a little more of a look than maybe you otherwise would have, especially when Saric is struggling outside of that shooting to start the season, because his effort and his intensity really is fantastic. He doesn't have the ball in his hands to put up big assist numbers, but he's clearly capable of making the right read and making a creative play to move the ball around on the perimeter. So there's something to work with. It's still, I think, very much in the wait and see mode with him.
What it might end up being, at least for the rest of this year, but maybe even moving forward, is just one of the options that you can cycle through. So I think he's not a part of the core, the Simmons, Embiid, Covington. I don't think he's a part of that, but they're going to need to try options. I mean, Markelle Fultz is presumably going to be a part of that, whether it's JJ Redick or if they replace him, and I want to talk about that in a minute. Having Saric as an option there, first of all, that it's nice to have options, and second of all, if the goal is to have him play enough minutes, that's another way to do it, is to give him some there, and then when other guys sit. So maybe that's the solution here, is not that you're thinking, okay, we're going to build with this as an understanding of how this team is going to go, but we're open to using it as a part of the options for now.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, Saric is still young enough and he has enough skill that you want to, like you said, get him on the court. And if you're going to be able to get him on the court right now, and that five-man unit right now, and like you said, it's like 140 minutes, but they're like a plus 26 net rating. That's absurd. That's absolutely absurd. The starting lineup has been doing really well. Nobody expects it to hold up to that degree, but for as long as it is, get the young player on the court, get the talented young kid on the court, and see what issues he can work through. He has struggled by and large coming off the bench in each of his 2 seasons so far. If it helps him get into the flow of the game by keeping him in the starting lineup, and that lineup is working well as a unit, then yeah, I let him play through, especially right now when Markelle Fultz is out for the foreseeable future. Jared Bayless is comfortable coming off the bench. I mean, it makes complete sense right now.
Going to take a quick moment to tell you about Harry's. Harry's is committed to a great concept, which is a great shave at a fair price. And I'd been familiar with them. They do advertising in many things that I listen to, but it really took me trying out their products to fully understand and to fully, believe it. You hear it, but trying out their stuff is fantastic. I am a big proponent of their shave gel. It is the best shave gel. It's what I use all the time, but their razors are fantastic too. And I love the way that it happened because they wanted to do a great shave at a fair price. So they bought a blade factory. They bought a razor factory in Germany and then ensured the highest quality. And then they cut out a lot of the other elements of the process that lead to higher costs. And so they pass those savings on to you, which is a great premise for any business, but especially in this one, which has some very entrenched interests to go at it. And so Harry's has wonderful quality products. And something else that I love about their belief in their products is the way that they choose to promote it. So the way that you can check it out from us is harrys.com/realgm. So this is a URL. And if you go there, you can get a trial offer for free. It's a $13 value. It includes a razor with the handle, that shave gel I like so much, and a blade cover, and you get that value for free. All you have to do is cover shipping. So you don't have to worry about the risk, if you want to call it that, of going through the product. You get to try it out for yourself, see if you like it as much as I do, as much as millions of people do. Over 3 million have switched to Harry's, and hopefully you like it as much as I do. And if not, all you missed out on was a little bit of shipping. But I am a believer in their products. I have been using it since the first time they sent it to me. Whether it's just great. I mean, it's really high quality stuff. Get a wonderful shave consistently. And now that I'm on camera more, that is something that really does matter to me. So again, you can check it out with that free trial offer. You go to harrys.com/realgm. Tells them you came from us. You get that free trial set to just cover shipping. Again, one more time, harrys.com/realgm. berries.com/realgm. So there are a couple different ideas, some of which Nate Duncan and I have talked about on Dunked On, that I wanted to run by you just because you see the team so much more than we do. And the first one is an idea that Nate posited last week, which I agree with as well, for at least for the time being, which is, do Simmons and Embiid in particular, and you could put Covington in here if you want, is their chemistry so good that you want to keep them together and avoid staggering them?
It's a good question. They have been absolutely steamrolled when those two have been on the bench. So if you're saying that grouping can be together for 30 minutes a night, I worry quite a bit about the remaining 18 minutes. It has been a real struggle offensively when Simmons isn't there to create. And I think I've actually seen more of TJ McConnell playing with Ben Simmons than I would have expected. And so far, it's worked out a little bit. But they've struggled so much offensively when Simmons has gone to the bench. They've struggled so much defensively when Embiid is on the bench that my gut still says stagger them. But I think from a continuity standpoint and just developing those guys in terms of getting used to each other and comfortable with each other and putting them in as many pick and rolls as you can and really locking down their defensive rotations, to me, if I would do it, it'd almost more be for a development reason than it would be for a pure effectiveness reason. It's a tough call. I mean, ultimately, I think the right answer is you just need better production from your bench. And right now, the Sixers' backup wings, their backup center, as we've talked about, just haven't been good enough. I'm not sure ultimately there's a way to scheme around that. But, certainly I want to maximize how much those guys can play together, if for no other reason than getting them, accelerating their comfort level with each other.
The other reason why I'm a big supporter of it long term, not as much for this year, I think you're very right on the idea that they don't have the right other pieces to fill in those roles. So if you're going to say, hey, if you guys get 15 minutes a game, figure it out, they don't have the personnel to do that, it actually opens things up in terms of how they use these remaining assets for the rest of the roster that are going to be bench units. If you have the idea of, okay, because if you're going to do a stagger, let's say we're thinking about Simmons defensively as a 4. I mean, offensively, his role is very different. That's why I separate these two things. If you stagger, what you're looking at for your number one big off the bench, you're looking for a guy that can play with either of them. If you don't stagger them, you're looking for a guy who can play. And you can figure the rest out from there. And while it will lead to growing pains in the early days, and that's more likely actually the early days of the 2018-19 season rather than the days now, because they're not going to make those adjustments this season, I actually think that works better, because then you can say, hey, this guy can play. Maybe we even get into that right. And then that's when, you think about the best reasons for a team to use a bench mob. I think back to those Sacramento Kings teams. There are numerous other examples of this, is when you cannot replicate what your starters do on a second unit. When you can't do that with other people, then you do something totally different and you make it work.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is something to certainly consider. And like I said, this year, develop chemistry. Future years, hopefully you have someone a little more competent behind Embiid, and that works out a little bit better. And look, when you add Markelle Fultz into this equation too, that's another guy who can really, ultimately I think he's going to end up being your starter. But he's another guy who, if you don't stagger them, you can put on that second unit and hopefully keep them somewhat competitive. It's just been a struggle this year to keep them competitive when either of those two have been on the bench. They just really have gotten so little from that bench unit. But I completely agree with where you're coming from.
That also provides the impetus to just load up on guys that can shoot and guys that can handle the ball a little bit, just because adding that to the second unit, and then of course whichever one of those guys shine, you can try them out in the first unit, would be a possibility. But another big kind of scoping question with them, and this is more clear now than it has ever been, because not only did they decline the option on Jahlil Okafor, but they signed Covington and Embiid, so we know where their money is going to be, and we know that my numbers have it before the draft picks at about $29 million, but of course those are going to cut into it. So my thought for a long time has been the place to go with that money is a wing/guard that can kind of fit their system. And so I guess the place, before we get into individual guys, which I want to do, is that still what you think of as the greatest use of that money?
Oh, for sure. And I mean, that's a pretty good class coming up that has that. You can dream big if you want with a guy like Paul George. And the Sixers are an interesting spot because if they can clear another $10 million or so in cap space, that combination of youth, money, and hopefully a playoff berth is at least gets you, a talk. But even if you go down the list, Avery Bradley in the season he's having, really good fit. A guy like Danny Green, another interesting guy that you can certainly have the money for. There's a bunch in that archetype where I think you can go and make a play for.
And that leads me into the other question, which is the three guys that I think of Paul George as a separate tier. And it's kind of like, if you can get him, even though he's a little bit older, if you can get him, you're get him. So then, and you and I have done this in draft circles before, but so the other three guys that are a lot closer to each other are Danny Green, Avery Bradley, and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. All three of those guys, assuming Danny Green declines his player option, which he will, are going to be unrestricted free agents, which is also very important to this. And so in all three of those circumstances, particularly with Green and with Bradley, their current team is going to be a serious contender. I mean, I expect Danny Green to resign. But so for me, where you start with this is the conceptual question first, which is, if all three were available, and let's say money's the same, even though it's obviously not, who do you think is the best fit, and how different are they? Would you be happy with any of the three?
I think the best fit, well, I mean, I want to say Avery Bradley would be my number one of that group. Certainly, I trust his shot a little more. I trust his man-to-man defense quite a bit. He doesn't have quite the size and the length that you would want for a switch 1-4 scheme, but he can really D up. And I think this is one area where I think sometimes the defensive metrics that we sometimes rely on don't entirely, capture, I think, what he brings on net in a quarter, or at least haven't over the last 2 years. I think he would be my top target. I would say Danny Green, but he's a little older. I think he'll be about 31 at that time. But his game, I think, fits in just as well. And KCP I'm still on if you get KCP more wide open looks, he's going to shoot really well from the perimeter. It's never really materialized yet, but he's also never had the shot creators he would have like Ben Simmons here. He's a guy that you would take a little bit of a gamble on. I still really like him. I still really like his defense. I'd like that shot to be a little more consistent, but I also think there's quite a bit of noise because he's taking some really tough shots. I think all three of those are reasonable targets. There's always going to be that question, well, do you roll over that cap space in 2019 when the cap's supposed to jump up, another $7 or so million? So it's a little easier to fit a 35% max under that. And do you go out and try to pursue the big guy like Klay Thompson? It is a risk when you have, one of the things that make team building with Joel Embiid tricky is you just never know how many miles are left on those tires. And you hate to think of basketball like that, but certainly any elite player, there's a risk that it could be taken away from you. But certainly somebody with that kind of a history, if you can realistically build a team that could be close to contention, and with another year of development from Embiid and Simmons, and a year of development from Fultz, I don't think you're a contender. I don't think you're beating Golden State by any means. But can you toss away a 50-win, a 55-win season if you can go out and get a guy like Avery Bradley who might complete the roster so perfectly? It's a really interesting question. I'm not entirely sure whether or not I want to wrap so much of the plan around a low probability like somebody in 2019. It's an interesting thought. I would really like Avery Bradley. I'm just not entirely sure what he's going to cost on the market.
My big concern with 2019 is the issue of supply. So first of all, Klay Thompson might be eligible for a designated veteran extension. It's also entirely possible he doesn't get it. But you basically in that class, to me, you have Kawhi, who's the dream of dreams, but I don't think that's realistic. Jimmy Butler, probably unrealistic. It seems like he's going to go back. Klay, very unrealistic. And then outside of those guys, it's really narrow. Chris Middleton is possible, but he's a little older, and he doesn't have the kind of switching onto ones element of it that I think you would like. And then there isn't really anybody else that truly fits that bill, at least for right now. I mean, then you're starting to get into maybe a Rodney McGruder or something like that, and then you're starting to worry about it. And I
different class.
And I'm really happy that you brought up the idea of the risk consideration with Joel Embiid. I think that has been underappreciated in this, which is, first of all, he's better now than I think a lot of people expected. So that's important. But also, you don't know how long you're going to have it. And so you push it while you can. And also, signing that player this year, meaning 2018, so signing them this summer, that means you're making that commitment, and theoretically, if something bad happens, that commitment will be over sooner. In the worst case scenarios, then you can figure out where you're going at that point. If you wait until 2019, that person is going to be signed for a long time. That person is going to be a part of it, and maybe in the high end guys, you could say, "Oh, well, you'll make it work either way," and that's completely true. But I'm just a supporter of it, especially because the supply is there. Now, if I were looking at a different position, like point guard, where this class is shaky and there isn't really anybody who's a good fit for the Sixers, then you start to think about this a little differently. Because, if they're looking for a one, then maybe Kemba Walker next year or Eric Bledsoe or somebody like that. but that's not what they're looking for. They're looking for more of a combo guard that is defensive and then off ball.
Yep. No, I mean it's to me, I would seriously pursue Avery Bradley. He to me would be the target of those three that you mentioned. Just because, I mean, he'll be 27, shooting the heck out of the ball from the perimeter, and we all know he can man up defensively. He would complete the starting lineup. Again, assuming Fultz comes and plays like the Fultz we saw at Washington. And the great thing about this discussion is we don't have to actually make these decisions until we get a lot more information on who these guys are and how close they can realistically be to being a real factor in the Eastern Conference. We have a lot more time until we get to that point.
And it might take a lot of that time to figure out really where we are with Markelle Fultz. You and I were both incredibly high on Fultz as a prospect, and I still am in terms of his ceiling. It's hard to know, at least at this point, how this affects it. But I want to take a moment to talk about why that was the case. And so for me with Fultz, especially with the Sixers, which was a fit I'd been in love with for basically since I saw Fultz play at the Hoop Summit the year before, which is the idea that he reminds me of Kyrie Irving in that he can function on and off the ball. And that's exactly what you want with the Sixers, because that's also means with his handle that he can attack closeouts. So if Ben Simmons finds him and the guy closes out too hard, he can then create a look off that. And so I think that as a one offensively, he fits in well with Ben Simmons, with a Giannis or somebody like that. And it just so happens the Sixers already have that guy.
Yeah. No, he's still, I mean, everything we said pre-draft still exists. It's maybe a little bit harder to see. There's a fog maybe hanging over Markelle Fultz right now that you have to kind of shake off. But there's no reason for me to believe that upside has changed. It's just, how do we get him back to that player that he was, whether that's changes he made in his jump shot over the summer, whether that's a shoulder injury. All I know is that the Markelle Fultz we saw for 4 games before he eventually shut it down is not the guy I scouted. It's not even a reasonable facsimile of the guy I scouted. And until we get to see him on the court with Joel and with Ben and with Covington, it's really hard for me to make any kind of a long-term statement.
And that's the prudent approach. And one part of this that gets frustrating for me is, I mean, we're both in a business where you have to produce a fair amount of content, but it's also true that if the Sixers don't have to make a decision right now, we don't have to make one now either. We can just say, this is where things are. This is kind of, and with Fultz, I would say the question that we should be talking about is, where does this need to be by May, by June, in order for them to make a decision? And that's a conversation that you can have. It's like, okay, well, they'll need to see, can he be healthy at that point? How does his jump shot look? Does he have confidence? Things like that. We don't have to say, this is what it will be then, but this is what we should be looking for.
No, and that's a great point. And I have no problem saying I don't know. Probably say that more than people would prefer, but I have no problem saying that. But you're exactly right. What do we need to see from him by the end of the year is a much different conversation. And, really you just need to see that he is back to, he's comfortable taking those jump shots. 3-point range, NBA 3-point range is something that is in his future. And that he's showing a little bit, he's getting used to the fact that he's not going to have the ball in his hands quite as much. And he's not going to be putting as many middle pick and rolls. And it's really just getting used to that role and embracing that role and getting that jump shot back. As long as he does that, then I think you have him penciled in as a key part of your future going forward.
Going to take a quick break to tell you about MyBookie. The holiday season is one of my favorite times of year in terms of sports. Not only is it NBA season, it's a little bit different now that we're earlier in, but also wonderful time for football, professional and college, and for hockey. And so you can make it a little bit more interesting and hopefully make some money yourself by using MyBookie. And so where you bet is just as important as who you're betting on. And so you can go to MyBookie and they have lots of different options for you. You can play the money line, you can play sidelines, you can do total. And MyBookie has super fast, reliable payouts when you win, which is a great thing that you're looking for if you're choosing to wager on games. And they have odds on every matchup and a great mobile site, which makes it easy to do on your smartphone. So for convenience purposes, especially, many of us are traveling for the holidays, so you're not around your laptop or your desktop, whatever you use for this sort of thing. So you can use MyBookie. And the way that you can check it out is you go to mybookie.ag. And then you enter the promo code REALGM, RDALGM, like the site I write for in this podcast. And what that does is they give you a 50% deposit bonus, which is awesome. So you put in money like you were going to do otherwise, and they just give you a 50% deposit bonus on top of it. And that also, of course, tells them that you came from us. So it not only gives you more money than you would have had otherwise, but it tells them, hey, that tells them to keep advertising on our show, which we obviously love. So again, you go to mybookie.ag, and then it's a promo code. The promo code is RealGM to get that 50% bonus. MyBookie, you play, you win, you get paid. Let's talk a little bit more about kind of Embiid and where he fits in, because what has always fascinated me with him is the combination of two disparate attributes offensively and defensively. So to me, defensively, he has defensive player of the year potential. I don't think you dispute that.
No, not at all.
But then offensively...
Meaning not at all that I don't dispute it at all.
Right.
Yeah.
But then offensively, I think he can check a couple of different boxes. At first, I hope that he could be more of like that high usage big man, and he certainly was that last year and has been for moments of this year. What I'm more hopeful of now is that he can be that when you need it, but that he could also be more of a change of pace. Like the guy, like the fact that he can hit trail threes is fascinating to me. Like that sort of a thing where you're not feeding him every possession, but that he can take advantage of the opportunities when they present themselves. And that is a very, very valuable player.
Yeah, and that is sometimes looked really good. Like there's been a lot of pick and rolls with Embiid and Simmons that look really good. Sometimes he takes maybe a little bit too much time to gather himself after coming off of that pick. It's still a little bit of a work in progress. He's a little more comfortable posting up than he is right now as a pure pick and roll player. But I think that is going to be a very big part of his future, especially because you have such a game changer and a pick and roll player in Ben Simmons. So yeah, it's really the main thing that you look at is his turnovers, and he has to get those turnovers down. That's still quite a bit of a work in progress. Some days he looks really good in that regard. Most days he still struggles quite a bit. Reading that double team is still something that, again, some days like against the Lakers, he'll make some passes that gives you a high degree of confidence that he will figure this out eventually. It's just there are going to be an equal number of days where he's going to turn over 6 times and really hurt your team in that regard. He is one of the quickest learners I think I've ever seen on the basketball court. So there's really no aspect of his game that I look at and I say that's something that he can't correct long-term in the future. But I mean, he really does have every skill you would want in a modern day big man. He can dominate on the block. You saw that against Los Angeles, and their decision not to double him for most of the game is one of the more curious ones that I've seen. But he can also then dominate you as a passer. He can step out from the 3-point line. You can run a pick and roll with him. He can take you off the dribble. It's really fascinating watching him develop and watching his skills progress and watching the mental aspect of it progress as he becomes more accustomed to those double teams. It really is. I mean, I just don't see many players improve like he does. Like you'll have KP on, and KP will be like, well, did a draft prospect really improve in the second half of the season, or did he get on a 10-game hot run? And how can we actually tell the difference? He's one of the only players that I look at, and you could just say, no, those are skills he didn't have a month ago. Those are reads he couldn't process a month ago. He did that at Kansas. He still does it now in the NBA on a regular basis. And that's probably, yeah, it's great that he's 7'2", 280 pounds. He made note of that the other day when he joked about people coming at him. Those are great attributes to have. But his mind to me is still his biggest attribute. And that's why I think any problems he has can be corrected if he puts enough time into it.
And that's why he's special. I will also note, as somebody who covers Steph Curry and Draymond Green, that even really smart players make those turnovers fairly frequently just because they're ambitious. And so I think some of that will be part and parcel to the experience. But it doesn't all have to be that way. And especially the ones for me when he's dribbling. I think that's the stuff that can be toned down a little bit. And I think he'll get to that point where he'll realize this team is so good, they don't need me to do that all the time. And, there'll be moments where he will, and that's fine. But you just, to tone it down a little bit, clean, let's say, 1 or 2 of those out a game, then that makes a massive difference because this team is going to be good enough that can really help them. Because let's say they have an expectation of getting 1.1 points on that possession. Getting that extra 1 or 2, that's huge. And I mean, and the defense. Yep. And so the other thing with Embiid that I want to watch closely, and I mean, I watch the Sixers a lot, is that he has been good defending against other teams' best lineups. Like there's something that sometimes gets lost in this of when a player, especially a backup center, does really well early on. It's like, okay, well, generally they're not going against the best dribble penetrating guards. They're not going against, the quality of play is disparate. He's playing as a starter and as a finisher, though his minutes, other points can be with second units just because of the way Brett Brown has used him. And he has done a consistently good job, not a perfect job, but a consistently good job of shutting down teams with the 5 that they want out there.
Yeah, I mean, it's I cannot speak highly enough of his defense. He still looks like he's rounding into shape. He's not quite making the same. He doesn't cover quite as much ground as I think he did last year. You can notice it a little bit when he's on the perimeter. He's not quite, last year he'd get switched on to James Harden or John Wall, and you'd say there's no way a guy of his size should be able to keep up with him at all. And he did a pretty good job of that. This year, he hasn't been quite as dynamic on the perimeter, but his numbers are still just as good. And you look at some of the reads he makes defensively, the rotations he consistently makes, and that to me is the biggest thing with Embiid. He has a consistency to him on that end of the court that a guy with, 50 games into his NBA career, maybe 120 games into his basketball playing career, that a guy that missed that much time and has played in that few amount of games has no real right to make. And when you combine that with his size and his strength and the ground he can cover, it really is. I mean, he comes out and he has a bad night offensively. He still, by and large, dominates the other half of the game. And that, to me, is why he is so special. The Sixers land has kind of got embroiled sometimes in a debate of who has more upside, and Embiid and Simmons. And it's great that you can have that conversation and not be ridiculous. But to me, it's always going to be Embiid, just because even on an off night, even when he's doing nothing offensively, which is few and far between, I mean, this is a guy averaging 22 a night, he is still completely dominating half of the court and completely taking another team out of their offensive sets. It's really impressive to watch.
Either during the draft process or during the summer league stuff, I made an analogy with Lonzo Ball that he had seen, partially because of the way Chino Hills played and to a degree UCLA, that he was like one of those kids that grew up playing online poker, that he had seen so many things, he had been through so many hands, and so he had been through more reps than guys his age. That helps Lonzo just see a lot of things on the floor. He has these expectations. Joel Embiid doesn't have those reps. He plays like that guy, but he isn't that guy, and it consistently blows my mind.
Yeah, I mean, the number of people that I've talked to, I've talked to people in high school, Kansas, with the team now, that will just say, look, we show him a move offensively. We show it to him once. We come back the next day. He spent the entire night in the gym perfecting it, and he looks like a 10-year vet pulling off that move. Like, they've almost never have to show him something twice. And that ability to pick things up on the fly and to be able to make those reads in game situations, it's something that great players have, and it's certainly something that I put in his balance sheet as a real weapon he has going forward.
I don't want to spend as much time with Simmons, partially because we're both busy people and we have things to do. But with Simmons, the question that I want to ask you is there something that you think people who watch him less frequently might be missing with how he started this season?
Well, I would have said the defense that we brought up earlier, just because I think the reputation for him was out there, and quite frankly, deservedly so, that he wasn't a guy who was going to really give effort defensively. And I think that perception is probably the one where if you don't watch him day in and day out, you might still think that is the case, and it has very much not been. I think one of the things that surprises me is people lose their mind when he finishes at the rim with his right hand. They go, oh, he's ambidextrous. Like, no, that's what he's trying to do. That's his strong hand.
Well, he's right-handed.
He is right-handed. And I still think people don't necessarily realize that, and shout out to Kevin O'Connor. But he's admitted that he was right-handed and just taught to shoot left-handed. And he still catches defenders off guard too, where he'll drive left. And in my head, I'm watching him drive and be like, he's spinning back right. He's crossing over back right. And it seems like nobody really picks up on that yet. And left-handed players tend to get a real advantage on that regard anyway, just muscle memory. So I think maybe you spend so much time gearing up, hey, it's a left-handed player, that maybe I don't know, but it seems like there's still a misconception about that. But he has been, I think when I scouted him at LSU, you go, okay, this is the type of player where NBA level spacing should really help him. And you looked at LSU and it was just a mess, especially when they lost Hornsby, probably their best perimeter player, halfway through the season, and it became even more of a mess. But you said some of these driving lanes should really open up when he got to the NBA. And conceptually, I kept that in the back of my mind for, the year and a half that he was out. But watching him come to the NBA spacing really helps him a lot. He attacks space, and really the only team I've seen, everybody plays off of Ben Simmons. Everybody knows he's not going to shoot. He has maybe, I think, 7 3-point attempts in his register right now. He doesn't have 7 3-point attempts. They're all heaves. Everybody knows he's not shooting beyond 15 feet. Everybody goes under the pick and roll. And by and large, nobody can still take away his drives. He's so fast with his first step. He's so strong when he goes up, and he changes direction so well that even when you take 2, 3, 4 steps off of him, he can still get by you and get to that second level. It's been really impressive to watch him, even in the half court, where I thought he was going to struggle a lot more. I think I checked recently, and he was third in the league in points off of drives, behind James Harden and DeMar DeRozan. And he's doing that, and I think he was shooting from the field. When we're talking about efficiency now, I'm not talking about drawing fouls or anything like that, but I think he was shooting better from the field than both of those guys. So for him to have that kind of volume when everybody in the gym knows that he's not shooting from 17 feet or further, it's been really impressive to watch.
Young players, like, high school age and earlier, should watch the way Simmons attacks space, because this is a growing development. It just so happens that a lot of these freak of freak big guys who can handle the ball, their weakest point is a jump shot. I talked about this with Chris Herring last week, and his idea with it was everybody has to have a weak point, and so it would make sense that that's just not where they put the reps in as much as everything else that they do. But whatever the cause of it is, you have to figure out, the next point is you have to figure out how to attack that, because if you're satisfied with the 15-footer, then you're not doing as much, not only just in terms of that being a low-value shot, but in terms of getting to the free throw line, getting other teams in foul trouble, creating havoc defensively, all those sorts of things. And Simmons does a better job attacking that space at this age than LeBron did. He does a better job of it than Giannis did. And both of those guys do a very nice job at this point in their careers. But that's what's so encouraging with Simmons. He's still incredibly young. To see him do something that is generally very hard. And I mean, he grew at that even just in the 2 games against the Warriors. Like the first game, he couldn't really get into a rhythm because Draymond knew how tight to get back on him. Basically to give him space, but then not concede it the whole way. And he was better in the second game. Some of that was also they put different guys on him. But I see so much potential for him, because when you figure the big stuff out early, then the smaller things get more manageable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Sixers, and it's weird to say after covering the team for so many years now, they space the floor really well. And 2 years ago, I never really thought I'd be able to say that. But also having Joel Embiid on the team, I think really helps Ben Simmons quite a bit. Not just because you can play a 5 out and pull the 5-man out to the 3-point line, which they do at times. But even when Joel Embiid's in the post, that 5-man's not rotating off of him, not for a second. And so many lanes open up because they're afraid. You're watching DeAndre Jordan, and the Sixers were backdoor cutting on him all night because DeAndre Jordan would not leave Joel Embiid. Even if Joel Embiid was 10 feet from the basket, he would not make that step or two over there to go over there and contest the shot, especially with a guy like Simmons, who's such an elite passer. So you look at some of the numbers, I think Simmons is shooting about 10% higher from the field when Embiid's on the court. And I think there's a real correlation there on why that is. And that's just one of the many reasons why those two play so well off of each other.
This is probably an unfair question to give you blind, but I've talked about it a little bit with Sam Vecini, and so I'm going to do it anyway. Knowing what we know right now about this class and the next one, and actually now this gets more complicated because not only of the lottery restrictions, but the age limit potential. Would you rather have the, let's say, somewhere between 6 and 8, so 6, 7, or 8 pick from the Lakers this year, or the Sacramento's unprotected pick next year?
So Sacramento has been really bad, and I don't have any real faith that they are going to improve substantially. Usually what you would say is it's different now because of the wacky protections. I would say, judging by the fact that most of the people in that range are big men, and look, you still have a higher need for big men than I think maybe many would expect because Rashawn hasn't developed quite as much. Based on how poorly Kings have played, and the fact that there would be no real protections on that if the Lakers pick conveyed this year, I would say probably the unprotected Kings pick is what I would prefer at this point. Obviously the dream is alive that the Lakers pick could end up number 1, and I give the Sixers credit for putting that protection on there because Doncic would be an absolute blast to watch on this team. I'm not sure, I think right now most people would probably have him number 1. There's still a lot of basketball left to be played, but conceptually he fits very well on this team. So that's probably the dream. But outside of that, I think I'd be okay if the Lakers pick conveyed this year and the Sixers got that unprotected Kings pick, even though theoretically there's still a lot of time for them to fix their roster and become a more competitive team. I'm just not sure I have any real confidence in that organization to do so. But it's also hard to say because I don't really have a strong grasp of what that 2019 draft class is going to look like.
Right. I think that's a big factor in this. And also, yeah, just with lottery reform and everything else, I just need to really see kind of where it's going. But the reason why I wanted to ask that is I think the last question is, after you and I talked about Markelle Fultz's fit with the Sixers a lot last year, it feels like we can make dreams a reality at certain points on this podcast. So what I wanted to do was, let's say the Sixers getting the number one pick is out of the question. Who in that range, from 6 to 8, that from what you've seen so far, which is probably not a ton just because there hasn't been that much that has been played yet, who from that group sounds like somebody that would make the most sense with where the Sixers are right now and where they're going?
It's a good question. And I will say, you joke about making dreams a reality, but it's amazing to me that I'm sitting here and I don't know. I haven't watched. I can't tell you how little time I've spent thinking about Markelle Fultz. And you talk about that, and that's making dreams a reality. That's a very big part of the Sixers' future, and I've pretty much just forgotten about it. It's really crazy to me that we can sit here and say that because the Sixers are so exciting with their big two, with Joel Embiid, with Ben Simmons, even with Robert Covington coming in there. They are so exciting that you can forget about Markelle Fultz, and you don't really want to. It's not as frustrating as maybe it would have been. So he could be a real boost to this team that I think a mid-season boost in excitement would be fun. I like, and again, I've watched a little too little of this. I'm not quite as high on Michael Porter Jr. as I think most people are. I would right now have Doncic ahead of him, certainly for the Sixers and what they need. I do like Marvin Bagley. This is mostly going on what I saw coming into the season. I have to really sit down and see what kind of progress he makes. He is an interesting big man in 2017, though. Ayton, I think, is just an incredible talent. I'm not sure exactly how he would fit on this team, but I think he's one of those ones that you take just because the talent's there. And certainly with Embiid, you invest a little more in that than you otherwise would have. Wasn't huge on Sexton from what I saw coming into this season. And I mean, he's a guy who I'm not sure I wouldn't say you cross him off, but I'd question the fit anyway, just from the team needs. It really does look to me, I like Kevin Knox quite a bit. And again, it's going to be interesting to watch him develop. A bigger guy, both in size and strength. I think he can defend the perimeter, which I think would be important in that forward rotation, or at least defend the three a little bit. And I think his versatility offensively could be a real weapon. I think he's probably the guy, if the pick conveys 7 to 10 range this year, he's probably maybe my sleeper in that range. Although I'm not sure if the draft stock right now would say he's a sleeper. I think he's probably been moving up. It's tough though. There's a lot of basketball to be played. And still a lot for me to watch as well.
Yeah, of course. There are three guys that I'll mention. One is Robert Williams. I think that the idea of getting a talented, high ceiling backup center who could theoretically even play a little bit of 4, having that spot filled with a guy who's on team control for a 4-year rookie scale contract plus then restricted free agency would be a wonderful thing for the Sixers, because then they wouldn't have to spend the money on the next Amir Johnson or something like that. Yep. Miles Bridges, I just think he would be a wonderful fit on a team where he doesn't have to be as big of a piece, so he can just try on defense and all that kind of stuff.
For sure.
And
I mean, a lot of that is also how much you buy. I've talked to a lot of people some are really bought in on his perimeter jump shot, some not so much. So it'll be great. He's one of those guys where I'm kind of glad he came back, because I wasn't 100% sure which way I was going on his jump shot. So having another year of data, I think, would be really good.
And then the other two I think Trevon Duval is a fascinating archetype point guard wise, just in terms of the backup spot, just getting a higher ceiling guy to have another option there. And then I want to watch more of Bruce Brown, but Brown has the possibility of being another option for that kind of 2-guard, can slide around a little bit, hit open shots. And so getting another bite at that apple would be worthwhile.
Yeah. And I mean, there's still a couple of 2-guards then that are in there in that group, in that group as well. And Lonnie Walker, Diallo, there's a lot of intriguing talent. It'll be great to see which ones really separate themselves from the pack. And like I said, I think the Sixers are in an interesting spot because you have theoretically 4/5 of your starting lineup kind of etched in stone for really what is hopefully the long-term future. So you can kind of pursue talent a little more than you are a team need at this point.
Yeah, you can go for more of a ceiling play. Anything else quickly that you think would be good to convey, especially to people who aren't watching the Sixers, about what they should be looking for on this team?
I mean, what you should be looking for on this team, I think, is really obvious. Tune in to watch Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, and everything else is kind of gravy. It's watching those two night in and night out has been a treat. And like I said, for a fan base that embraced hope so readily and so willingly for such a long time, it is great to see that hope and that faith rewarded.
It is. They're one of my favorite teams to watch. I watch them as much as I can do while fulfilling my other obligations, but it's been a blast to watch them, and it's been great to talk with you. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Derek Bodner for taking the time to come on. You can read him at The Athletic Philadelphia and The Athletic College Basketball when he puts work there. You can also follow him on Twitter at Derek Bodner NBA. That's DerekBodner NBA. Thanks again to him for taking the time to come on. Really do appreciate it, especially on some pretty short notice. I was thinking about whether I wanted to do an episode, reached out to him, and we turned it around fairly quickly. And I love talking with Derek. It's one of my favorites. And so to have the chance to do it right at the right time, and I felt good that it wasn't a jinx, because after our recording, they did end up beating Portland. And for whatever reason, I'm vaguely paranoid about that at certain moments in time. So I really do appreciate everybody. I mean, Thanksgiving, you think about all the positives in your life, and for me, I'm fortunate that there are many, and a big part of that is everyone who helps make this show what it is. That includes the guests, that includes my support from Real GM, Chris Reyna, and everyone over there, and then CLNS Media too, Nick Gelso, and really everybody at CLNS Media. They've been such a wonderful partner for this show, and all of you listeners are an incredibly important part of this. It's a show that's been going on now for years. I appreciate the word of mouth that everybody has shared and their feedback. So Danny Leroux, NBA at gmail.com, at Danny Leroux. Email's way better because it shows up in my feed. I do get stuff frequently as my standard promise here. If you take the time to write it, I will take the time to read it. I can't promise I'll respond, though I do try. And if you want to support the show beyond that, which I do appreciate, leave a rating, leave a review in the podcast player of your choosing. It's great if it's iTunes. If it's not, that's fine. You can also subscribe, download every episode. Those are big things to do with this show or any other. And you can also check out our sponsors. For this episode, that is Harry's. You can try out their free trial set, which is awesome. Go to harrys.com/realgm. It's a $13 value. All you have to do is pay for shipping. And then you can check out mybookie.ag. If you use the RealGM promo code there, you get a 50% deposit bonus. You can check that out. Tells them you came from us, all that fun stuff. So I don't know exactly where I'm going to go from here. I have a couple of guest ideas for where I want to go. I don't like doing a ton of team-specific stuff unless there are big stories that I want to talk about. But there's so much going on in the league, and of course I'll get back into college stuff too when the need presents itself. I have watched a few games so far this year, not as much as I want to eventually, but enough for right now. So going through all that kind of stuff, it'll be a really fun road. If you want to support me, lots of different ways you can do that. Have a couple new pieces at Real GM, have one in the offing right now as well. Then wrote one on the Eric Bledsoe trade. Also dunked on, of course, Warriors Watch, my Warriors podcast, writing for The Athletic, done some stuff for the Sporting News as well. And my book, 100 Things Warriors Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die, is available through local bookstores, hopefully in your area. Amazon, Barnes & Noble have it as well. And you can also get there's a Kindle version, and there is like a PDF ebook version on Triumph Books, my publisher's website. So you can check that out. And yeah, it's phenomenal. It's been fun. I've done a couple signings already. I'm doing another one on December 2nd, I think, up in Petaluma. So that'll be fun. And yeah, thank you to everybody who has helped make all of this possible. It is a thrill of a lifetime to be able to spend as much time as I do focusing on all of this stuff, be able to talk and write about basketball and be able to make a living doing it. I really do appreciate that. So thank you so much to everybody for your part in that. Take care and make it a great day.